On Nunvav Amid Beis, Arinu La'ayinu, that's what we did. And then Rav Sheshes says to us, Eishes Ishal Yisrael Shenensa, Afal Bishim Muteris L'Baila, but Psula L'Kuhuna. In other words, the Bias Ones, in a case, tragic case of a Bas Yisrael, Eishes Ish that was Ninsa, is that she can no longer be married to her husband. She can't even marry another Kohen, even after he died. And that's the halach of Eishes Kohen Shenensa v'nidma l'bayla nesra olav. Only in the case of an Eishes Kohen. V'tana, and we were taught tuna by our Tana in our Mishnah that Abal Yevimpa baby Chogi be Meis Manos ben Ratzon be Bia Gmur ben Behara Bilfad ben Kedaka ben Shalok Kedaka Kana. And v'chein, the din applies to Haba al Achas Mikol Arayos Hamuros Patora. The bios that we enumerated here, in the case of Arayos, then they apply. Psulos, or one of the Nashim, Psulos, like an Almana L'Kohen Gadol. And these bios, of all those different variations of bios, gruos, that were listed, is Pasal L'Kuhuna. She's a zona. So from this din in the Mishnah, we have a raya, says Rav Sheshes, my claim, that's V'chein Haba. And on which beer that was mentioned earlier, did the Tana the Brisa say the word V'chein? The Tana the Mishnah say the word V'chein, my love. Shouldn't we assume that the meaning of the Tana was on all the enumerated bios, the different scenarios that we mentioned earlier, Loshna b'shogeg, Loshna b'vesed, Loshna b'onus, Loshna b'ratzon. In all these cases, he was Kona. And in all these variations of Bia, the Tana says V'chein, Shabal Achas Mikol Arayos, and one of the Arayos is Eishes Ish, Pani Psola. And the Mishnah says that with that Bia, she became Psula to marry a Kohen. So we see clearly from our Mishnah that Habal Eishes Isha Yisrael Ba'ones is Pasla Minasi L'Kunas. The Gemara says, lo, or rejects this proof from the Mishnah. There's no raya for the Mishnah to have Sheshes, Yesh Lomar, that in the case of Baba Ones Al Eishes Yisrael, is Eina Neseres Bazel L'Kohen, Mai V'chein Ahara. And that which the Mishnah says, Echad Amar V'Echad HaGomer, Kana, that Ahara is Kohen Yevamot like a Bia Gemura, and that the Mishnah ends and concludes with the word V'chein Hababa Ha'ara Al Achas Mikol Arayos Pasla. If that be the case, then Eishes Ish, in a case of a Yisrael, even though a bia of that sort is included in Arayos, and she becomes Psula Linasi L'Kohen with Ha'ara, but not in the case of Nivela Ba'ones, only in the case of Baratzon, Ba'ale Baratzon. Then she becomes a zona, and she becomes Psula V'Nakuna. So the Gemara asks, Ha'ara Deman, on which of the women that are forbidden did the Tana add that Nivalu Be'ara Nechshavador L'Bia Gemura? As we saw in the case of Yevamot, Ha'ara is considered Bia Gemura. Elam, if the Tana was talking about Ha'ara Da'arayos L'Meimar, is this given to understand that Ha'aras Da'arayos Yalfidim Yevamot? The Lashon V'chein is that it is if Yevamot is like the paradigm, and then the Arayos are derived from Yevamot by analogy. So from Ha'ara and Yevamot, Ha'aras in Ha'ara, in the case of Harayos, is considered a Bia Gemur, just like it's considered Ha'ara and Yevamot is considered to be a Gemura L'Knosa, is Adarabba. On the contrary, it should have been said in the opposite way, that Ha'ara, which is Kohen and Yevamot, we derive from Arayos, Elfida mi Arayos. The Ikar Araya be Ha'ara be Arayos, right? In the Pasha Nida and other Arayos, the Torah says that Ha'ara, Hara, is considered like a Bia. Whereas Hara and Shivcha Charuf is not a Bia. And then we derive Chayve Lavin Hara Kibia Gmura with the Gzeir Shava Bia, just like Chayve Lavin is the Yevama Niknes Lev Yavam Be'ara, but certainly we derive from Arayos the din of Yevama, that Hara is considered like Marbia. So it's impossible to say that the Tana of Mishnah, when he says V'chein, he's talking about Hara, because Hara in Arayos, as a Bia Gemura, is going to be the teacher from which we learn and derive the conclusion of Hara B'Yevama K'Bia Gemura. Else, the Gemara goes back and says that when the Tana says the word V'chein, as we rejected before the Raya of Rav Sheshes, and we would make him the intention of the Tana in a different way, my V'chein, Ashalo Kedarka Darayos. We said Lo Chilik Ben Bia Gemura and Shalo Kedarka, that Bia Shalo Kedarka is Kona B'Yevama like a Bia Kedarka that is derived from the Pasuk Chachal Loli Shavi Yidma. And we have a ribu here for even a Lakicha Shalo Kedarka. And on that, the Tana concludes and he says, we derive from Gzeir Shava Bia Miyavama. And V'chein, Haba Shalo Kedarka Alachas B'Kol Arayos Psola. So therefore, Eishes Ish, even though she's considered one of the Arayos, and she becomes Psula Lakuna with a Bia Shalo Kedarka, but not in the case of Nivela Biones. Only in case of Baal Eberatzel, then she becomes a Zona, and then she's disqualified from Kahuna. So Gemara is not happy with that interpretation of the word V'chein, because if that be the case, that V'chein is going on Bia Shalok Kedarka is Adarabba. On the contrary, Ikar, the paradigmic case from which we derive that Bia Shalok Kedarka equals Bia is from the Pasuk Mishkvei Isha, which means that Yesh Bisha Shtei Mishkavos. One is Kedarka, one is Shalok Kedarka. And that's by Rayas Ksiv in the Pasuk of Vayikra Chav. The Isha Asher Yishkav is Zachar, Mishkevei Isha. So the source for the halacha Bia Shalok Kedarka that's considered a Bia for Arayos is Arayos. And then it's impossible to say that the Tana, when he used the word V'chein, he's referring to Bia Shalok Kedarka in Arayos, which is considered like a Bia Kedarka, and deriving that from Yevama, where Bia Shalok Kedarka is considered like a Bia Kedarka. Ella, so the Gemara retracts what it said before this last Pirush and interprets with a new twist. Pirush Chadash. What does the Tana mean when he says V'chein? And we're going to reject again the proof of Rav Sheshes. And my V'chein ashalo kedarka dechayve lavin shel kuhu, like almana l'kohen gadol, l'kusha v'chalutz l'kohen hedja. And when it says earlier that in Yevama bia shalo kedarka is kona kabia kedarka, now the Tana finishes and completes his presentation that huadin, the same law applies to chayve lavin of kahuna, even though it doesn't say mishkavei isha and chayve lavin of kahuna almana l'kohen gadol or grusha l'kohen hedja. Nevertheless, Abba al achas michayve arayos, michayve lavet of kahuna shalo kedarka is posla. She becomes a halol kahuna. But bottom line is, there's no proof from our Mishnah to the din of Rav Sheshes Omar Rabba ish eshes kohen shenenza is baila loke oleh mishum lav dizona. So a man has a relationship with an Ashes Kohen it's a rape relationship. And nevertheless, there's going to be a psul of chalol, and she's asur al baila, and it's not like Eshes Yisrael shenensa, where the Torah distinguishes between ritzona and shalo ritzona, like it says with regard to sota in Parshas Nasa, v'chachav isha sa shichvas zera v'nalam me'enei isha v'nisteravi nitma'a v'erein ba v'hilo nitfasa. Dafka, because she was lo nitfasa, she wasn't grabbed against her will, but rather l'rtzona nivala. Therefore, nitma v'nensa v'nesra l'bayla. If it was nitfasa bal parcha, lo nitma v'biyazu l'bayla. And when it says the word vehi, that's a mute. He, Eshes Yisrael, and here's where we're going to have the distinction between nivala l'ratzo and nivala b'yonis. But Eshes Kohen, there's no difference between nivala b'ratzo and nivala b'yonis. So the Gemara asks, an isha shenivala liacher, nitma, nesel l'bayla, it says lo yuchal bayla asher l'kachta lios l'isha pesher hutama. In bayla balea, if he violates this iser of vehi asher hutama, then areu loka mishum lavazeh, he violates the lav lo yuchal bayla. So in Eshes Kohen shenensa, who he said is asur al bayla, if the Baal would have a relationship with her, it would be a chi of malchus because nitma lo. Whereas according to Rabbah, who said that bayla lo ke'oleh mishum zona, lo hizkir shalo ka oleh mishum tum. Why does he only mention that the Baal is in violation of a chi of malchus because of zona? He doesn't mention anything about the fact that there's tumah here. Is mishum zona in, mishum tumah lo. She's asur la midin zona, as we said, she had malchus, but mishum isa tumah lo. There's no malchus. And here you're telling me, Rabbah, that local lev mishum zona. So the more answers, yeah, Baal Kohen local lev, because zona, and because of tumah. Rabbah said mishum zona, and he didn't mention anything about tumah, and we applied the logic of mishum zona in mishum tumah lo. Ema, perhaps his intention was af mishum zona, in addition to getting malchus mishum tumah, she'll also get malchus, and he'll get malchus mishum zona. Mesiv Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera raises an objection to Rabbah, who said that Eshes Kohen shenensa bayla lokala mishum zona. The Brisa says that in the parish of Sota b'midbar hey v'hi lo nitfasa, she was not nensa against her will, but rather was nivel of haratzon asura hanitfasa muteres. And the vehi indicates a mute. He v'lo acheres shedina shona, the yesh lo acheres afal chafal bishi nitfasa asur ve'ezazu Eshes Kohen. Now the iser of Eshes Kohen shenensa is not formulated in the language of a lav. It's only derived from the mashmos when it says that Eshes Yisrael muteres bonus. That was the miyut of he. So this iser then is what we call a lav haba mechal esei. Lav haba mechal esei. So now we have a contradiction to Rabbah, who says that an Eshes Kohen shenensa bayla loka lea mishum zona, there's no malchus, there's only a violation of an essay. Amar Rabbah answers, hakol, meaning all women that were nivelas tachas baleim to another man, bein b'ratzon bein ba'ones, hayu b'chlal. They were included in the Isur zona because they were nitma lo. And if the Baal is a Kohen, Asura, they cannot maintain that marriage relationship. Is then in the pasuk earlier it says Isha Zona Lo Yikachu. It means that all of them were nivela be'ilas nus. Is ksheparet l'cha kosuv l'gabe Eishes Yisrael vehilo nitfasa asura nitfasa muteres michlal v'Eishes Kohen hidekaima kaima. Right, she was considered like a zona. Lifnei she'Eishes Yisrael nismata, before the miut. So if he's a Kohen, Sheboleh, then he would get Malchus because of the lav in the Torah of Isha Zona Bechule Lo Yikachu. Kaima. Kaima means Omedes. It's still standing. Even after Eishes Yisrael Nismata, but the Isha Zona is still remaining, and therefore by local Lel. So we see that this Lashon of Eishes Kohen and Nivla Bionis Nachsheva Zona, and she's Asur L'Kohen V'Loka Mishum Zona, that in addition to have the Malchus of Tumah, she gets the Malchus of Zona. The Ika Diamri, others have a different transmission of Rabbah. Rabbah, Eishes Kohen Shenensa, and she's Asur L'Baila because V'Hilo Nitfasa. That's Tumah, and she's Asur L'Baila because of Lo Yuchal Baila Loshu L'Kachta Lios Lo L'Ishach Resha Hutama. But Baila, local, if the Baal, the Kohen, had a beer with her, he violates the law of Tumah, and he gets Malchus for the law of Tumah. And again, we're being medayek from the words of Rabbah, who says that Baal Loka Mishum Tumah. He doesn't mention a word about Zona. Apparently, Mishum Tumah in, Mishum Zona and Lo. Alma, we see that Rabbah holds that in Nivla Ba'onis, Lo Karina Be Zona. Masir Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera raises the following objection to Rabbah, who says that Eishes Kohen Shenensa Bailo Loka Aleh Mishum Tumah. It says in the Brisa that, quoting the parsha of Sota, Vehilo Nitfasa V'Nensa Bal Karcha, and therefore she's Asura, Nitfasa, if she was Nivela Ba'ones Muteres. And when it says the word Vehi, which is a miut, it's referring to Yeshlucha Cheresh Afal Pi Shehi Nitfasa Asura B'Ezo Zo Eishes Kohen. So the Isa of Eishes Kohen Shenensa is not formulated as a law, but rather it's derived from a diuk of the mashmos that only Eishes Yisrael Muteres Ba'onis. And therefore, this Isa is what we call an Isa Lava B'Michal Essay. The Lava B'Michal Essay. And again, we have a kash on Rabbah who said that Eishes Kohen Shenensa by local Emishum. And the Gemara answers, Amar Rava, Hakolo Yibechlal. All women that were nivelos, Tachas Baleim, Bein Bionis, Bein Beratzon, were included in the Isu Tumah L'Baila. And Lo Yuchal Baila Kachlosh L'Kachel Yos L'Ishach Re'asher Hutama. Ukshapirit L'Cha Kosuv Gabe Eishes Yisrael Vehi Lo Nitfasa. Asura, implying that Ha Nitfasa Muteres. Aresha Hotzi Akosuv es Eishes Yisrael Shenensa Militami Labala Vimuteresla. But Mechlal, the Eishes Kohen Kaima. Implied is that in the case of an Eishes Kohen who is Nansa, Kefisha hoisa tmeil abayla. Lifnei sheis Yisrael nitzmat. Aisha's Cohen was not included in the miyut, and therefore, if the Cohen would have a relationship with her, he would get malchus because of the love of lo yuchal bayla loshu lekachto, etc. And the pasuk ends with Achresher Hutama. With that same tuma, kaima vomedes afli achashes Yisrael mismata, and therefore baila lokel leo. So this leads us to the Mishnah on the bottom of Nun Vav Amid Beis. So just a little bit of an introduction to the Mishnah here on the bottom of Nun Vav Amid Beis. We're talking about a case of a Bas Kohen, and she had Erisin to Yisrael, so she ceases to eat Truma. She loses her rights to eat Truma Bebeis Avia because now she's considered to be married to a Yisrael who doesn't eat Truma, obviously. And this is based on a Gemara later on Samach Zayin that Erisin pasels and Velo Machilin. That means a Bas Kohen, if she's Mureses to Yisrael, so the Erisin pasels her from eating Truma. And that's because Kanya Bahavoya. And the Torah says, Ki Bas Kohen Ki Siya. Siya means Havaya Kedushin Le'ish Zar, Hu B'Trumas Kadoshim Lo Socha. So Mishas Havaya, that's Kedushin, she becomes Psula to eat Truma. But if Nivala Bi'ilas Isur O Lipsul Kahuna, then after the Misa of her husband, let's say she becomes a Chalola, not through Kedushin alone, but through Be'ila, then she does not return to her father's house to eat Truma after his death, her husband's death, or his Gerushin, and that's because she became a Chalola through his Bia. If a Bas Yisrael Nis'ar Kohen, as we said before, when Torah she eats Truma from Shas Kedushin, and that's called Kinyan Kaspa, but the Rabbanan made Xera that she doesn't eat Truma Mishas Kedushin, but only Mishas Nesuin. And now the Mishnah says that a Bas Yisrael, or a Bas Kohen for that matter, an Almana Kohen Gadol, and he's enjoined from having a relationship with her with an Isur Lav, or Grusha V'Chalus Kohen Hedjot, and it's Mina Erison. So now we're going to have Machlokas Tanoim. What happens if she's Mishtameres Libia Bia Savera? She has not had Bia yet, and she's therefore not a Chalola. Yet the Tanakama says, Lo Yoflu B'Truma. The Gemara is going to identify this Tanakama as Rabbi Meir. And this is an Isur D'Rabbanan called Mishtameres L'Bia Savera. Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Shimon never accepted this Gzera D'Rabbanan Machshirim. She's not a Chalol at this point. They haven't consummated the marriage, so Nischala B'Biyaso, therefore they can eat Truma. She can eat Truma. However, if these Kedusha Avera to a Kohen is Nis'armul and Nisgarshu and a Nesuin Psulos, only after Bia does she become a Chalola. But Mina Erisin Ksheros. And that means Nisgarshu means if she was a Bas Kohen, she's now allowed to go back to Beis Avia to eat Truma. And Nis'armulu, she can marry a Kohen. And the Gemara asks to find Tanya Omer Rabbi Meir Kal Vachomer. How do I know that a woman who had Kedushin to a Kohen Ba'avera cannot eat Truma from Chas Eris and Ma Kedusha Rishutz? For example, a Yisrael marries a Bas Yisrael. Ein Machila B'Truma. I mean, that's obvious. There's no tzad kahuna at all. How much more so Kiddush Avera lo kolchke? At least in the case of Yisrael to Yisrael, it was Rishus. But here, we're talking about Almod L'Kohen Gadol, Grush L'Kohen Hedget, which is Kiddush Avera. Even though she has not yet become a Chalola, she cannot eat Truma. Omru Los, Rabbi Lozer and Rabbi Shimon respond, I don't get it. What kind of Kal V'chomer is this? Lo Mamarta B'Kedusha Rishusha Ein Shekain Ein Lo Lahachil B'Makom Acher. There's no tzad here of kahuna and acholas truma that she's a Bas Yisrael, he's a Yisrael. And therefore, Tomar, do you have a right to conclude about Kedusha Avera? At least Yesh B'hem Koach Lahachil B'Makom Acher. If a Kohen would have been Mekadosh and a Bas Yisrael and Isha without any Avera, he would be Machil. So at least in this case, where she hasn't become a Chalol yet, there's a tzad to be Machil, and that's true on a Deraisa level. Omer Abu Lazar, Omer Abu Shaya, Petzua Daka Kohen Shekish Israel. So we have a Kohen who's a Petzua Daka, and he's enjoined from marrying any Bas Yisrael. We'll see about marrying a Bamzeres, but a Bas Yisrael Ksheirish he cannot marry. And that's based on a pasuk in Dvarim Chav Gimel O Yavo Petzua Daka Kutshivcha B'Kal Hashem. Rashi explains, "Sheniftu o nidkeu beitzim shelo." In Bonel Machlokes, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Lozer, Rabbi Shimon. Le Rabbi Meir do mishtameres to be a psul dorais lo achla. So even though her husband is a Kohen, she cannot eat truma, even though we're only up to the level of Erisin of Kiddushin, because it's no different than according to Rabbi Meir. The case of Almona Hamu Urasa L'Kohen Gadol, Gruch Hamu Uresis L'Kohen Hedjod, she's Mishtameres L'Bias Avera, Ha'anami here too, she cannot eat Truma, Lo Achla, because she's Mishtameres L'Bias Avera. However, according to Rabbi Loza and Rabbi Shimon, the Ami Mishtameres L'Bias Psul D'Oraisa Achla, which means that she's Kinyan Kaspa from the time of Eris. She's not yet a Chalola, they haven't consummated the marriage. And they are Mutar L'Almona Hamureses L'Kohen Gadol. According to Rabbi Lozer of Shimon, they, in those cases, she's allowed to eat Truma. And therefore, now we turn to Daf Nun Zayin, Ha'nami, so to a Bas Yisrael, Hamureses L'Ptzua Daka, Achla. She can eat Truma, because since from the time of Kiddushin she's Kinyan Kaspo, she can eat Truma, and she wasn't Nivala, she did not become a Chalola. And according to their sheet, at least Tanoim, Rabbi Lozer of Shimon, Mishtameres to be a Psula, and a Psula, Lechol B'Truma V'Tayim. And the Gemara now is going to try to disagree and reject this statement of Rabbi Lozer the Amora, in the name of Rabbi Oshia the Amora, that Rabbi Lozer of Shimon would be matir for Hadi Truma in the case of Muresas L'Psua Daka. And the Gemara is going to try to make that distinction. So that we'll see in Mitzvah Hashem, B'li Neder, tomorrow.